Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the We Can't Wrestle podcast. Nate Maxon, your host, here with you. And this time around, well, I decided about 2 months back that if some guy out in California or some guy out in Iowa or whatever can have their own wrestling Hall of Fame. I've never worked a match either, Meltzer, so I'm going to have my own Hall of Fame. We have the We Can't Wrestle podcast Hall of Fame, and I have a panel of 12 folks that I decided could vote on this. We got a ballot together. We did some voting, and we're going to have segments on this show discussing the results, discussing the people that we nominated, and I think it's going to be a good conversation about the history of wrestling. And the first segment here, Aaron is here with me, of course.
Hello.
Kind of. He's kind of here. And a guy we've tricked into being on the show a couple of times. ECW and independent wrestling superstar, Mr. Chad Austin, is here with us as well. Hey, Chad, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, guys, and thanks for sending the money to my girlfriend's, my fiance's PayPal account, because I'll never know if he really sent it anyway. So yeah, you kind of really did dupe me into doing this.
Hey, Chad, want to do a video conference? Sure. Hey, Chad, want to do a podcast real quick?
Yeah. Here's my fiance's PayPal account. This is what I charge.
And while we're talking about that, don't forget to check Chad out on Twitter at, what is it? Is it at Chad Austin or at Chad Demera?
It's at Chad Austin Demera.
There you go. And, of course, Chad's Video Vault. And I guess before we start this, we should shamelessly plug our other podcast, the most amazing ECW podcast on the planet, the Reliving the Extreme podcast, heading into, as of this week, we recorded our 17th week. And it's been, as we say every week, a doozy so far.
Yeah, that's a dude. If we don't smarten up and brainchild this stuff together and get shirts. It's a doozy. And then literally, instead of having, how they have like John 3:16, you have like ECW and you write the date, ... like whatever that episode was.
Reliving the doozy. Yeah.
Yes, dude, you can totally do that.
Well, here we go. I'm going to let you guys know who the 12 people, myself included, wound up putting. Everybody nominated 8. And then based on that, we broke it down to 20 nominees. And the final 20 were as follows. We had Randy Savage, Vince McMahon Jr., not Sr., Andre the Giant, Stu Hart, Terry Funk, Jerry Lawler, Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker, Bobby Heenan, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Roddy Piper, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Bruno Sammartino, Paul Heyman, Sting, Ricky Dozan, and Mean Gene Okerlund. Now,
how many people was that?
That was 20. That was 20 in the ballot. Now, the 8 that got in, our first inductees ever into the We Can't Wrestle Podcast Hall of Fame are The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Steve Austin. Ric Flair, by the way, was the only one that everybody voted for. Steve Austin, Andre the Giant, Vince Jr., Randy Savage, and Bobby Heenan. Now, also for the listeners, just so you know, the criteria that I sent to the gentleman involved was that the person had to have 10 plus years as a pro, and I said there could be exceptions made in a situation like, for example, Magnum TA. In-ring ability, promo ability, being of significance to the business, whether as a whole or to a certain promotion or territory, and drawing power. So, that being said, the final 8, what do you guys think? Anybody that should not have been on there? I have a couple that I actually wish that somebody else would have been in their place. One being Randy Savage, not that Randy Savage isn't one of my favorites, but I don't know that he's the first class,
I agree.
I guess I'll go through. What do you think about Undertaker? I think I voted for Undertaker. if one of my criteria was, top of a territory for an extended period of time, I mean, 30 years at the top of the biggest territory, I guess, or the biggest company in the business is nothing to shake a stick at.
Yeah, I didn't vote for
it's still the WWE, so yeah, I mean, it's not a weak thing to do, but it's not like you're headlining like the territories.
Right. Aaron, what were you saying?
I said I didn't vote for Taker on the first ballot, just because I think like there was guys that were before him that should go in to a Hall of Fame before the Undertaker.
Okay. And like I said, I mean, I did just because I took into account that he was on the top of the WWF/WWE for such a long time. And I mean, drawing power, how can you argue with drawing power and etc. But just again, my opinion.
The worst part was he was drawing power, I'm sorry, when the company was in a down period.
Yeah, I mean, he's
if you remember, like, who was the other baby face?
It would have been
Brett?
Kind of a revolving. It was first probably you'd say Nash when he was Diesel, and then Brett, and then Shawn.
Okay, so
yeah,
then after that, there was the business was down, right?
Right.
So he was inherited a bad spot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can always take that in consideration,
Right. Well, that and ultimately later on, when you get into the bigger stadium WrestleManias, the streak was always a draw at WrestleMania. One of the you had your title matches and then the streak. Those were the big draws for those huge WrestleMania gates.
And something else you could say about the longevity of the guy and what he did and everything was it's not like until like 97, 98, it's not like he was in there with, the great workers of the business.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They definitely gave him some doozies. That's for sure. Here, Mark. Here's Giant Gonzalez.
Just look at his WrestleMania lineup.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe they didn't play Frankenstein. When
do
he
some Memphis
watch
shit.
The guys, and I can't believe that I have to run out there and take
it. Like, hey, Jake, go get a good one out of Bundy.
Yeah. I literally can't. It amazes me that I was there one night and they just didn't get out there. What are you doing back here?
Get a good one out of Bundy.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
The second guy that got in this year, Hulk Hogan.
He's one of the only two that of my 8 that I sent you that actually got in.
3. You had 3 that got in.
Oh, sorry.
Well, who are these people? Other people that are voting on this?
The 2 other co-hosts of the We Can't Wrestle podcast, and then other guys that I produce a wrestling podcast for in the Asylum, and then some guys that I know from a group called Fandemonium that's a wrestling group as well. A lot of probably I'd say 20s and 30s age-wise.
All right. Well, then
but no, Aaron, you had Vince Jr.
Yeah, you're right. I had Bobby.
Heenan.
I forgot about
Okay.
Heenan, sorry.
So what about Hulk Hogan, Aaron? I know you had him on your ballot. Let me check mine. I can't remember if I had him on mine or not.
Just kind of the bullet points of it is what you gotta base wrestling off. I mean, what it is, it's money in the bank. And before Austin, he was the guy that was put the most money in Vince McMahon's bank, sold the most merchandise. In my opinion, he kind of recreated what a baby face is supposed to be in wrestling.
Yeah, he was a heel.
Yeah.
I mean, if you watch Hogan, he was a heel. He was never really a baby face. Every one of his matches and feuds, he was the fucking heel.
And I mean, the guy captured a nation. I mean, there's no way that anybody that was a kid in the 80s can say that at least for a little bit in their life they weren't if somebody tells you, "Oh, I hated Hulk Hogan, I wasn't a Hulkamaniac," and they're my age, they're a liar. Everybody was a Hulk. Every kid was a little Hulkamaniac, and then just longevity in the business and the fact that people wrote him off, but he recreated himself, man. When he was in WCW, everybody was just like, Hogan sucks. It's the end of Hogan. And he took that NWO shit and he rode with it. So I think the guy deserves it.
Chad?
Yeah, I as much as I want to agree, but I don't want to agree with you. But I can. There's no way that Hogan's not going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first class of the Hall of Fame. We know Hogan's going to be there, and Hogan could almost be a special class. Right, Aaron? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is a special class. This is their first class. And Hogan definitely deserves to be in there. But in the first class, I don't know. That's why I never wrote him down there. I didn't vote for him.
I think I had him on mine. Aaron kind of pretty much took any notes that I would have. Just, I mean, not only a draw. Him and Vince McMahon Jr. together and doing what they did. I mean, put wrestling back on network television for the first time since the Dumont Network, since the 50s or 60s.
Well, Turner had it in the late 70s.
Network TV?
Well, the TNT, TBS was pretty much national.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's being an Atlanta channel, and then they went national. And then he also crossed over, okay, so his movies weren't great, but I mean, I actually have heard stories that back in the 80s, if you took a picture of Hulk Hogan and Ronald Reagan to some country in Africa, everybody knew who Hulk Hogan was, and they didn't know who Ronald Reagan was, so I mean, just the sheer popularity and everything. Like you said, Chad,
Hogan definitely Hogan's not even a first ballot Hall of Famer. They would even have thought about building the Hall of Fame if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan. There would be no idea of it.
And same story on the next guy. And like I said, this is the guy that everybody in the panel voted for, and that's Ric Flair. I mean, I don't know that you, just like what Chad said with Hogan, I don't know that you have a Hall of Fame without Flair.
Or a thought.
Yeah. And I'll let if you want to start on Flair, Chad, he was on your ballot, I believe. Let me see here.
I think it was
no, he wasn't on your ballot.
He wasn't?
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't on your original nominations. However, on the ballot, you did vote for him, and we all did.
Oh, okay. All right. Mainly because I was going to build up to Flair to have his own, nomination, his own introduction. Because, I looked at it like, I'm not sure you guys thought of it the same way that I did, that this is the first hall, the first inductions. So you have a lot to choose from.
Oh, yeah, a ton.
So think before you pick people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just randomly pick Undertaker, Sting, all the other people.
Well, that's like Chad and I were talking about it one night about a month or so ago, and I don't even know if you remember, Chad, but we were talking about it about a month or so ago, and that was kind of my point. Was I think you get this first class out of the way. Everybody, pops their load with Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and Ric Flair and Undertaker and everything. And then, as the years go on, you have to think about it a little harder and you have to dissect it a little harder and break it down more. And but Flair definitely deserves to be in. And I mean, there's no argument. Greatest professional wrestler of all time.
He's also, if he isn't the first nail you fucking hang, it's the second nail you hang in that Hall of Fame. So yeah. You ain't building the Hall of Fame without Ric Flair. I mean, seriously, it's going to be like people 100 years from now are going to be hearing stories about this guy.
Yeah.
there was this guy like 100 years ago.
Well, if you think
He
about
might
it,
even still be alive. Like
Yeah.
talking about letters.
walking around with the newest diva. Well, like, and it really is that way because you think about we those people that don't look at the history, if they think of the 1950s, they're going to think of like Antonina Rocca and Gorgeous George,
Tony
and
Parisi.
they're not going to know those outlying names. Like this is kind of what you were saying about Flair. In 100 years, people are going to know who Flair was. They're not going to know who Paul Roma was, and that's not a diss to Paul Roma. It's just there's certain names that are going to be, stand the test of time, and other guys are just there for their time.
Well,
And I can assure you, nobody voted for Paul Roma. I really didn't think that Paul Roma's name lasted 20 years. You just brought it up. What are you testing me and Aaron?
No.
Okay. It's only 20 years ago. Paul Roma. Or no, 30 years ago.
In 100 years, his children will remember who he was, or maybe his grandchildren. But
I wouldn't let Paul Roma in the Hall of Fame if he had a ticket.
So, I will say this. I've watched some MSG house shows on the network.
He was great in the ring and everything.
Back when he has perm.
He was good in the ring and everything. But
well, I mean, if you guys are going to kill me, then I'm not going to say anything more. I'm just saying, like, his work is fine.
It is.
He just didn't have anybody to tell him how to be assertive, like how to put the match together. Like he only knew what he only knew how to do.
Mm-hmm. So
that's what he told the guy. That, like, this is what I do. So he didn't know how to do anything else, like what the other guy knew. Mm-hmm. And it was always awkward. And I was just like, man, this guy's so good, but not so good.
And him and Hercules is Power and Glory. Great tag team that never got the belts that should have. Just saying.
I agree, I guess. I mean, at that point, they were giving the belts out like it was fucking just mail. You look in your mailbox, you got the tag team belts. Fuck. Now you got to carry them around.
There's more luggage I got to check. Yeah. Aaron, did you have anything on Flair that you wanted to touch on before we move on?
No, it's pretty cut and dry with Rick.
Mm-hmm. The next guy, another guy that I think is an obvious choice, Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I even break Steve Austin down into a couple of different levels because, and this is not a knock at all, but by the time he was literally the biggest draw in the history of the business, and again, like Hogan, transcending the business and crossing over into mainstream. Not only that, he had almost two careers because that before, when he was wrestling as Stunning Steve Austin, what a hell of a worker, and before his injuries and his knees started to get bad, and he masked it great when he was Stone Cold, as far as all that went, but. Like I said, almost two Austins in those two characters in those two companies, and so one of the best workers and one of the biggest draws, I think, of all time.
Go ahead, Nate. I mean, Aaron.
I didn't put Steve on my list just for the same thing I was saying with Taker. That I just the only one I actually put on my list that was just I'm gonna put this guy on my list because I'm gonna vote with my heart was Hogan, because he was my childhood or whatever, but I figured Steve's got time, so I didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't put him on right away because, like Chad said earlier, I didn't know if there was going to be an amount of times you could vote for people, so there were guys that I think I wanted to get in before.
Now you did have him.
And plus, I knew other people were gonna. Yeah, and plus, I knew other people were gonna have him on his list.
Yeah.
So on their list, so I didn't put him on.
I actually didn't have him on mine either, ironically. And Chad, you did have him on your list.
Who?
You had Steve Austin on your list.
No, you said you had him on his list. And,
Oh yeah, it was you. I must have froze up or something.
oh, yeah, he did. Well, I mean, yeah, because I tried to like look at all territories, all eras. You know, it was our first class. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so it was very, very subjective. It was our first class, so we really could have done anything. You know, and yeah, I just, of course, Undertaker's in the Hall of Fame. There's a whole bunch of people that you have a reason why you build a Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Undertaker, The Rock, John Cena, all them guys are people why you build a Hall of Fame. So yeah, they're in it, but in the first class, to me, it's not attractive. It's not sexy to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd rather see somebody just remember. You know, I'm 50. I don't even give a shit. I'm the oldest guy in this group. That I remember somebody like a Ray Stevens. You know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we'll get into that in a second because I have a couple of them that I nominated. That I mean, I'm 42, and but you know, I watch as you get older and you watch back. I'd rather watch shit from before, sometimes before I was born, or at least when I was like between the age of 1 and 10, and I didn't even realize what what was there. You know, I love to go back and watch it. But also another guy that can't be argued with that got in, and let me see, I voted for him. I've had him on my list. Chad had him on his list. And Aaron, did you have Andre the Giant on your list?
I did not.
Okay. I had Andre on, and you know what? It's funny because as big a star as I perceived Andre the Giant to be, I did not, honest to God, I did not realize Andre's career until I read that book that just came out last year. And just the sheer drawing power he had and the scope of his career and man, damn. You know,
dude, if you could find, I mean, Tim White is the last guy alive. That if you could find some sort of a way to figure out how this guy lived every day, that's the guy you got to talk to,
right?
Because Andre is a phenomenon in more ways than just his size.
Mm-hmm.
He's incredible. A buddy of mine just texted me today. He sent me a video of a YouTube from '84 where at first he fell asleep in the ring, and then when Antonio Inoki tagged him to come into the ring, he kicked the guy and then tripped and almost fell out of the ring. And I was like, it was Andre in '84, man. Come on.
He put asses in seats. He was an attraction. I mean, from France to Canada to the United States, Japan, worked with every big star from the time that he started to the time he retired. I mean, you know, you don't have to mention WrestleMania 3. You don't even have to touch WrestleMania 3, to be honest, to know what a star the guy was.
The Killer Khan angle.
Yeah. Yeah.
People like said that Vince McMahon used to say, would this guy, like when talking about talent, he'd be like, would this guy stop people in an airport? You know, like if he was walking through the airport, would he build a crowd just by walking through? And it's like, how could you not, if Andre the Giant walks in the room, how do you not gravitate to the guy?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Jesus Christ.
Then I can't believe he didn't get a Skylow low. Can this guy
if this guy is trotting through the airport,
instead of saying, Skylow low with Andre. If you were the paparazzi moment, there you go.
Well, Aaron, you mentioned Vince McMahon Jr. He was the other guy, or another guy that was in that got in. Vince Jr., I mean, it's speaks for itself, Vince being in. Love him or hate him, love what he did to the business or hate what he did to the business, he changed it for better or worse. For a period of time, I mean, he was responsible for guys making more money than they'd ever made. Of course, he also worked them to death to make that money.
Is that necessarily good for the business?
I like I said, that's why I prefaced with love or hate. Because I mean, to that respect, that also led to a lot of sin and vice and excess that maybe ended some careers or shortened some careers or ended some lives. So I mean, I guess we could probably spend an entire episode talking about the pros and cons of Vince McMahon, but I think when you look back at the impact on the business, that's a no-brainer. Aaron,
he's lost it now, and I know we're not talking about now, we're talking about then, but like I think he's the greatest. He might not be the greatest booker or whatever all time, but he's the greatest promoter of all time. He's created some of the top drawing stars ever, like Hogan, Austin, Rock. Not necessarily saying he created them, but he gave those guys the platform to make themselves what they are. We probably wouldn't have had as wrestling on pay-per-view, like we wouldn't have had pay-per-view, things like that without Vince, and merchandise and just the different shit that he did. And he thought outside the box at a time when nobody wanted to think outside the box. And sometimes I think when people talk about how Vince McMahon killed the territories and stuff like that, I don't necessarily 100% agree with that all the time. But that's just my opinion.
There were a lot of short-sighted promoters at the time that couldn't see, like you mentioned, kind of. Vince saw, okay, TV is no longer within 5 years, we're talking, 84, 83, 82. TV is no longer going to be just your ABC, NBC, and CBS channel in Davenport, Iowa. People are going to be able to see the same thing nationwide. So why wouldn't I take my promotion and make it nationwide, instead of catering it to a certain area? And that's not me saying when I prefer one way or another. I'm just saying I see where Vince McMahon was looking at what I see his vision. The world of entertainment and the world of broadcasting is changing, and you either change with it or you die, i.e. Vern Gagne. You have to change. You have to evolve. And Vince is wallowing in his own muck now because he won't evolve. He wants it just to be that vision he has, and that ain't that good. I mean, the long and short of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this whole entire discussion was over Vince being in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? We wouldn't even be discussing a Hall of Fame. Earlier it was like, yeah, you can't build a Hall of Fame without Ric Flair, whatever. We wouldn't be talking about a Hall of Fame
without Vince McMahon.
And Vince gets a bad rap on some shit too. Like, people talk about his Hall of Fame, and it's like, it's not an actual Hall of Fame. It's not a real wrestling Hall of Fame. Dave's Hall of Fame is the Hall of Fame. It's like, well, you know what? I'll give Vince this. Vince, at least when he puts somebody in this Hall of Fame, say it's like a Coco Beware, he's going to give Coco Beware $5,000. You think Dave Meltzer sending his Hall of Fame observer people like $5,000? No. And they're like, oh, Vince's Hall of Fame isn't a real Hall of Fame. It's like Vince McMahon at least has a banquet, Meltzer doesn't even have a building. It's I know Vince doesn't have a building, but Meltzer doesn't even give him Meltzer gives him no money and doesn't even give him a chicken dinner. He just puts him in the flag. Fuck that shit.
Do they really do like a Hall of Fame like thing?
The WWF?
Like a dinner?
WWE?
Yeah.
Yeah, they wrap it all around WrestleMania.
No, I know they do the Hall of Fame thing, but they do a Hall of Fame dinner too.
Yeah, Pritchard's talked about it and shit. Like they do it afterwards, and all the guys get together and just have their meal and party and have a good time. And Vince pays them all like basically. Like, man, I'm sure Austin and guys like that get more, but if you're just going in, I heard it's like $5,000. You get $5,000 a Legends contract if you go in the Hall of Fame.
Do you think there's cameras there?
That would be wonderful.
I'm sure there is. Vince tapes everything, but Meltzer, like I said, Meltzer doesn't even send him a watch or anything. Like,
Casio.
He just puts them in they're in his sheet, and they're just like, "Oh, Dave Meltzer, your Hall of Fame's fantastic." Whatever.
Stupid. But move on.
Randy Savage. This one is the one I said I love. Randy Savage. Randy Savage is one of my top 5 ever personally, but I don't know that if we're judging, if it wound up being the people of the magnitude that we have in this first class to kind of sort of, I guess, get them out of the way. I don't know if he's there. I don't know. He was fan-fucking-tastic, but Randy, and not that he doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm glad he made it. It's cool, but I did not put him on my list. I just, as much as I love him, not this year. He wasn't on my first guys that I had.
I would say this. I know a couple of the guys that were on the voting dais or whatever, but I think a lot of guys were going with how I said I voted Hogan. I think they were voting more with their this is the guy I liked when I was a kid, instead of, okay, I'm going to look at the facts and the history and like the meat and potatoes of it. You know what I mean? It was more just like, oh, I like Randy Savage, or oh, I like Sting, and I'm not knocking that's their choice, you know.
No,
but
I don't think Sting should be in the Hall of Fame anyway. But
that's
I
know, I'm just saying people were voting with their heart, not their head. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a personal problem with Randy Savage. Like, I only met him a couple times, but from his body of work, I don't even put him in the top 200 of all time. So him going to the Hall of Fame in the first class, to me, that's a shame. It's shameful.
Bobby Heenan is the last one, and
come on.
Bobby Heenan to me is a no-brainer. Bobby Heenan was, Aaron and I have discussed it on the show before. Bobby Heenan wasn't just the funniest guy in the history of wrestling. Bobby Heenan was the funniest guy in the history of ever. Bobby Heenan of everything. He is up there with Groucho Marx and George Carlin. And Bobby Heenan was to me, the funniest dude that ever lived. Blassie was too. But Bobby, man. And then the way he got heat as a manager, and Bobby was so good at not just keeping he had, how do I even want to describe this?
So Aaron, hang on. When you were describing how he was, and he had the heat of all the people you said that he was incorporating into his gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that so many times with him that I saw it. I mean, we had him in town for I want to say it was 2006. It was a convention, and he ribbed just everybody. Everything was a rib because he's dealing with a lot of kids, a lot of us. We're all younger looking people, and he thinks that he's doing a gimmick, so he's ribbing everybody. Like Bobby Heenan just didn't stop, and on my Facebook it does pop up the memories, every whatever year it is that it happens. But yeah, like that was one of the coolest things ever.
I bet. I never got to meet him. Go ahead, Aaron.
Me, and I was going to say that I know he wasn't at least as far as I know, he was never a promoter. But there wasn't a guy that was just great at everything. Like everything he did, he was great at. Like he was great as a manager, great as a commentator, and people don't sometimes think about it. That at least guys our age and shit don't think about the fact that he was a hell of a wrestler, man. Like Bobby can bump like a champ. Like Bobby was fantastic.
Well, it's like I was going to say something I was going to say a minute ago.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just never, ever not entertained by Bobby Heenan. And I don't think he did a little bit at the end of WCW because who didn't? He never not gave 100%.
Right.
As long as the company that was backing him was giving him 100%, he gave them 100%.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I was going to say, as far as him being a manager, he's the guy I think that drew that walked the finest line between getting his heat, but never stealing the heat from his guy. Never stealing the heat from the guy. It was Bobby Heenan and he had his heat, but I don't think he ever stole it. I think Rick Rude begs to differ.
Yeah, Rick Rude's the only guy that I ever read anybody that he ever managed. Rude's the only guy I ever read that said he didn't want him to be his manager, and Bobby even said that. Like Bobby said Rude hated him being around. And it's like, why wouldn't you want Bobby Heenan? If you're a heel, why wouldn't you want Bobby Heenan as your manager? I don't understand that.
Well, at that point, you have track record versus track record.
Mm-hmm.
What are you gonna do? I'm sorry, Rick Rude. I can go on YouTube and see your name spelled OODE. Against them, no, it ain't happening.
All right, so there it is. Taker, Hogan, Flair, Austin, Andre, Vince, Randy, and Heenan. That's the initial class of the We Can't Wrestle Hall of Fame. Now, for the next 20 minutes maybe or so, I wanted to discuss the outlying people that were on our lists that didn't get in. And Aaron, you had Gorgeous George, Stu Hart. You voted for Heenan, Vince. You had Terry Funk.
Sam Hart?
What?
Did you say Sam Hart?
Stu Hart.
Sam Hart was the lesser known of the two brothers.
He's the one that kept the
basement.
That's way
back. Aaron had Gorgeous George, Stu Hart, had Heenan and Vince, Terry Funk, Hulk Hogan, Jerry Lawler, and Bruno Sammartino. Aaron, if you want to go down your list and we can discuss any of those.
I'll just read the bullet points for the ones that you were talking about. Gorgeous George, I put first TV star in wrestling. He set the trend for the people that followed behind him, like guys like Buddy Rogers, Adrian Street, Ric Flair. He had a hell of a run. He was the first guy that I know of that really incorporated having like a valet or a manager, not just coming out and taking their jacket, but like using them in his act. He had catchphrases and shit. Like he had the referee would go to pat him down for his weapon, and he'd be like, "Get your filthy hands off me!" Like that was just like crowd interaction. And a random fact is that his television debut was ranked by take it for what it is, Entertainment Weekly, as being one of the top 100 TV moments of the 20th century. So, and it's the only wrestling thing that was on there. So I think Gorgeous George was just a trendsetter, and I think he should be on. I think he should be in it. And anybody that has the brains in the late 50s and early 60s to act as effeminate as he can in an arena full of jar-headed, cigar-smoking homophobes and throw bobby pins at him and shit. That's a guy who knows how to get heat, for Christ's sake. Come on. I mean... So that's why I wanted George, and I think it's kind of sad that more people didn't select him.
Oh, I mean, what should I say? all the names that I fucking
We'll get to
I
that.
said then, not a single one of them got a mention. There wasn't even an honorable mention. Nothing. I got nothing. I mean, poo poo. Poo poo. Oh yeah, that's great. Not a single one. Sting. Oh, great. Vince McMahon. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I see what's going on here. Jesus.
Go ahead, Aaron Stewart.
Stewart, he's the father of the greatest wrestling family ever, in my opinion.
And apparently Sam Hart too.
Yeah, Sam Hart, the lesser known Hart. He helped bring he helped bring a lot of guys to North America that might have maybe not got noticed when he brought him into Stampede, and just the list of people that he trained and or had part of the training of is you can't compare it to anybody else. It's just it should be recognized, in my opinion.
Who, Bret Hart?
Stu Hart.
Ooh.
Oh, Hall of Fame. Stu Hart Hall of Fame. Yeah, I'll go. Of course. And where's he at? And who got bumped? Out of my list? Who got bumped? Come on, who got bumped? What, Bill Watts? Bill Hayes? What? Who was it?
I think Chad really wants to talk about this list.
We're gonna let him be
bitter.
Yeah. All right. So let me see. You had you also had Terry Funk on your list, which I did too.
Yeah. Terry Funk. I never saw Terry Funk have a bad match until I watched that match he had with the Canadian Wolfman.
What?
He could work with anyone except the Canadian Wolfman. He was the NWA champion for 424 days. And I just think the guy, everything I've heard about him, he was just unselfish, and he would work with anybody and try to do the best he could with anybody that he had, and never really big dogged anybody. From everything I've heard, like, it was never just like, I'm Terry Funk, you're gonna do it this way, just shut up. I just think the guy, he's a wrestler's wrestler, in my opinion.
I don't know if I've ever told this story on any podcast, I've never told it to my friends and stuff like that, but I had like an old tape that had some like very old Terry Funk footage, like the one where he dumped the oil can on his head.
Yeah.
But it was all like, it was from the studio. It was the interviews, it was the angles, kind of thing. And then I made a copy for him and gave it to him, and he patted me on the back and he goes, I already been there. I don't need to see it again. And it was only specifically because it was the oil on his head. And he had the braids. Do you think he wanted to see himself having them braids again?
Probably not.
I can't believe it if they play that funky music.
And also, if it wasn't for Terry Funk, we wouldn't have our podcast. We wouldn't have ECW, in my opinion. So,
nope. Hats
off to Terry Funk.
And the other guy, or let me see, another guy that I had, and you also did, Aaron, was Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler is one of my five personal favorites ever. And I mean, you talk about, granted, a lot of it was him, doing the booking himself, but you talk about somebody on top of a territory for a long amount of time. You got to talk about Lawler, and then also, he just the promos He's one of the most, to me, Chad. I want you to tell me if you think I'm off base. I think that Lawler is one of the most realistic professional wrestlers.
Oh,
I mean,
not only is Jerry Lawler one of the most realistic professional wrestlers, he's probably the number one guy in at least two categories of that whole entire criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen a guy. I mean, he can't work. He doesn't know how to do moves. He can't do like spots.
Mm-hmm.
That's not happening. You're kidding yourself if you're going to try to call spots with Lawler. But goddamn, go back on YouTube and look at them videos where they have him punching people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how they're selling. Are you kidding me? Them people went banana.
And his promos, like I don't even know how to describe it. Jerry Lawler, lots of wrestlers have lots of ways of cutting promos, but Jerry Lawler's promos always feel like there is not in any way, shape, or form an act, that he's not turning up the volume, that he is not. It is Jerry Lawler talking, and it's the most, to me, it's the most real thing,
Well, dude, Aaron, I'll tell you why. It's because everybody where they're doing all this stuff, they know who he is. And he's not speaking about like how I'm better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
He's just speaking like he knows everybody that's watching the show.
And listen to this title lineage for this man. He was the AWA champion one time, okay? But he was the AWA Southern Heavyweight Champion. He had 58 reigns. He was the Memphis Southern Heavyweight Champion 58 times and held the USWA Unified Heavyweight Championship 28 times.
That's only, wait, Ron Killings. Ron Killing, R-Truth is really going to try to break this record. Everybody's worrying if somebody's going to break Flair's record. Is it going to be Orton? Is it going to?
Lawler's over there spotting it like, ugh.
Lawler's like, I brought that kid up, and now he's going to break my record.
Unbelievable!
You bastard, K-Crush! You bastard! All right, Aaron, and the last one on your list was Bruno Sammartino.
Just the fact that the guy owned the city, like he owned the mecca of professional wrestling. Sold out Madison Square Garden. Supposedly sold out Madison Square Garden 188 times. Between his two title runs, he was champion for like 11 years. And another thing that I always kind of applauded about the guy was that he stood his ground for many years. That he felt like, this is how I feel. I don't think what they're doing up there's right, and he never faltered from it. Mm-hmm. And where a lot of guys like a superstar Billy Graham or something
or fucking Barry O.
Yeah, like superstar Billy Graham, like he'll knock it until they throw some money at him, and then he's like, "Oh, you guys are the greatest thing in the world,"
or until he needs another kidney transplant.
Yeah, but Bruno didn't. He didn't falter from his opinions, in my opinion.
Well,
and
I think the popular opinion is that by that point Bruno needed a break.
Mm-hmm.
Like he really needed time off. And I don't know if Billy Graham was necessarily the guy that was going to beat, Bruno, but it was going to be like, by the time Bruno said he wanted to leave, it was going to be the next guy he worked.
Yeah.
The next guy's going to beat me, and then you figure out who beats him.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of thing. And it was Billy Graham, and Billy Graham was perfect. And, and honestly, to tell you the truth, I don't think Bruno even knew how great of an idea Billy Graham was of him beating him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't have two more polar opposite personalities You know what
And-
a yin and yang.
Yeah, it was
Well,
so
maybe-
it was so great. But I mean, but history already showed that you only get a heel champion for 3 months or 3 weeks or or whatever.
So now we're going to dig into the last 10 or so minutes of the segment here. We'll dig into Chad's list and we'll see how many of them made it.
None of them. Nobody.
Well, one guy that Chad and I
made up some names.
Sam Hart.
He had Bruno San Martino, like Jack. What is it, Jack Pfeffer or whoever? Yeah. Now, one guy that Chad and I both had on our list that I totally agree with Chad. I think should be in the Hall of Fame because without this guy, you don't have modern Japanese wrestling, and that's Ricky Dozan. Ricky Dozan was the father of modern Japanese wrestling. Actually, as a matter of fact, there's no New Japan or All Japan without him because both of those guys, Jaya Baba and Antonio Inoki, were proteges of his. And
they wouldn't have split.
Yeah, and I mean, he just, like I said, he is the father of Japanese wrestling, and especially as popular as Japanese wrestling is now, and as part of big a part of the culture it is there, and how it has transcended over here. There's no doubt in my mind. Like one of the first names I wrote down before I even wrote Undertaker was Ricky Dozan.
Wow. Yeah, before you're Undertaker.
Yeah, or Hogan even.
Oh yeah, and Savage. Oh my God, Ricky Dozan. I don't even think, from what I've actually did some research on him, and I read he didn't even think that Japan wrestling was that big.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't think it was like there was any money in it.
But correct me if I'm wrong too, but wasn't the fact that he was going to have, there was a match, and I might have the story a little screwed up, but there was a match or something that he was going to have, and because of that match, it made like a surge in television sales in Japan because people went out and bought TVs because they wanted to watch Ricky Dozan.
Yeah, I heard it was wasn't it his like feud with Blassie? Yeah.
Like to be the reason that people go out and spend thousands of yen or whatever to buy a TV. I mean, that's a pretty badass career,
Yeah, dude. I mean, what can you say?
Mm-hmm.
When a whole entire network changes the whole entire facet for you. Good God.
The next guy on Chad's list was Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes.
Buddy Rose?
Dusty Rhodes. Buddy Rhodes, yes. Buddy Rhodes. Especially that blowaway diet. I mean, that's some Hall of Fame shit right there.
Well, Dusty Rhodes, come on.
I'm actually surprised that Dusty did not get in. I really am. Like he's one that's kind of surprised me but I mean, I'll go ahead, Chad. You can go ahead and speak on it. I don't want to speak on your list for you.
I think Dusty's legacy lasted less than people think that it did.
Mm-hmm.
What's it? It's not even 72 when he broke in. What's it? 76, 77 when he started like booking, and then so it's like 77 to 85 or 87, 88.
88,
yeah. So you see the ups and downs, the ebb and flows, the everything. I just think Dusty is the guy. If he made that kind of money in that time period, he's a Hall of Fame guy. I just don't think this class, in my opinion. Some of his dumb shit. I mean, you guys can speak about that. I don't know.
But Dusty's also one of those guys that I look at as
I'm watching Dusty now on TNA.
You see his fingerprints. You see his fingerprints long past his career. I mean, you see, you know, obviously as kids, but I'm just talking about all the younger talent that he influenced and all the talent that he got to work with and pass his knowledge on to. And definitely he's still around in spirit. Now, the next guy on your list, Chad, was Alan Dumont.
Well, you guys wouldn't be seeing it or talking about it.
Televised wrestling in the United States. You talk about the Dumont Network. That was the first, you know, that was the first real Aaron, you talked about Gorgeous George, and that was his platform, you know. And yeah, I mean, and to be perfectly honest with you, I have to plead ignorance. I don't know a whole lot about Alan Dumont. I've never done a lot of research on the network or what got him, you know. I mean, obviously wrestling was cheap television that they could easily produce.
I actually did do a lot of research on him. And they loved the wrestling program, but they got strong-armed by some outside other sources that wanted them to produce like their other shows.
Okay.
So like the actual Dumont Network lasted only a little bit of time because somebody else took over.
And then so they kind of got pushed out, is what you're saying. Pushed out of their own. I mean, pushed out of their own creation.
I mean, it was kind of like everything was dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
Like there wasn't anything there after everybody, you know, everything changed hands.
So the next person on your list, Paul Bosch, legendary Texas promoter. Big part of the NWA. You know, during the heyday of the excuse me, of the NWA, and possibly the father of Gino Hernandez.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Paul Bosch, legendary promoter, the rough and tumble Texas style wrestling.
Also a promoter that they say nobody ever had a bad word to say about, and that's saying something.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. Hold on just a second here. Sorry. 50.
How many people nowadays are we starting to hear that about? That we don't have a bad thing to say about.
Are we?
the only part of the reason might be because a lot of the people that were around the people aren't around anymore. You know what I mean?
Probably. Yeah, I mean, Norm, I couldn't tell you the last time that I said, "Hey, these are the great people to be around." Whatever. Look at them.
So you did have. Here's one, Chad. Here's one that got in. You had a vote for Steve Austin, so he got in. And then the next person also got in, Andre the Giant. And then your last two did not, one being Ray Stevens. And I'm actually kicking myself in the ass for not putting a vote in for Ray Stevens. I should have knocked somebody out and voted for Ray, because now excuse me. What I do have to say is I have to admit that I have not seen enough. I guess there isn't really a lot of footage of like him and Patterson and stuff though from out west, is there? I mean, I was going to say I don't think I've seen enough of him, but I don't think there is a lot out there of him in his younger days. And, you know, when people say he was the frickin' best worker in the world.
Dude, Nate, you can. If you can find anything on the network or on YouTube, mm-hmm. like whether he's in a tag team or he's in singles, watch the way he sells. Like when the guy punches him in the gut, mm-hmm. when the guy throws him in the buckle and comes out and gives him a punch to the head. Watch how he throws the guy into the buckle. It's fantastic. It's like the other guy's not even in the picture.
Ray's just wrestling around him.
Yes. I mean, it's that good because Ray knows what he wants to do. Mm-hmm. I've seen enough Ray Stevens matches to tell you, yeah, he does it. He does that. He's the one that invented that flip over the top rope, the Bobby Heenan.
Mm-hmm.
That Bobby Heenan stole.
Yeah. And Ric Flair stole. And it's like, also people say, oh, Patterson and Stevens and Bockwinkel are two of the greatest tag teams of all time. What's the one name that's in both of them? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
right.
What's your common denominator? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last guy on Chad's list before we wrap up here is, oh my boy, it's Jim Barnett. And I don't think you can argue with that one either. You know, one of those guys that kind of, until recent years, when, you know, people started speaking in shoot interviews and et cetera, kind of a behind the scenes name that, you know, until recent years didn't get the credit he deserved in the public sphere, I guess, but influential nonetheless behind the scenes. And you guys have anything on Mr. Barnett?
Aaron?
No, I'll let you go. It was on your list, so.
What? Like, leave it up to me?
It's not often that Aaron gives up the spotlight, Chad. You should eat that up.
Seriously, you got nothing.
You're the main event, buddy.
No. I want to thank you for the house. No, I had who was it again?
Jim Barnett.
Oh, Jim Barnett. Oh, well, he wasn't. Hold on. He wasn't number one on my list.
No. I wasn't reading. No, I wasn't reading them in order. No.
Okay. I just wanted to get that straight. No. But Jim Barnett in the Hall of
First
Fame.
time Jim Barnett and Straight have ever been in the same sentence, but that's okay.
Aaron? I mean, honestly, I look at our Hall of Fame so subjectively. I looked at it like it was our first class. We have so much to pick from. We got to start digging deep, and picking, going outside the box.
And that is definitely something that as years go on, we will have, I think, a lot more, like you said, just a lot more to sift through, a lot more to discuss. But hey, look at that, an hour. I want to thank. Go ahead, Chad.
Does that make you think anything different about the show with the Hall of Fame guys? Like how we picked them guys? Like we got to start picking them at a different level. You can edit this out of it.
Well, I want to thank Aaron and Chad for joining me in this segment here on the Hall of Fame edition of the We Can't Wrestle podcast. Thank you, gents.
Oh, you're welcome.
And